All right. Welcome everyone to Artsfield's Racial Equity Grants for Individual Artists application info session. My name is Miriam Manda and I am the Manager of Grants and Community Engagement with Artsfield. We're really excited that you guys made the time to join us and are interested in applying for this grant. And yeah, I hope you guys have been seeing, we're trying to spread the word, and we hope that you can also help us get the word out about this grant opportunity. So just a quick rundown of our agenda for today. We're just going to do some introductions for those of you who are not familiar with Artsfield and what we do. And then I'm going to walk you through the grant program. And then at the end, we will open up for questions. But at any time, if you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or pop a question in the chat and we can address it at that time. Because I know sometimes if you have a question and you leave it till the end, you might forget it. So just feel free to hop in with any questions. And yeah, we are joined today by our president, James McKissick. So James, if you want to start us with some introductions about Artsfield.
Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate Miriam's welcome and say how good it is to see everyone. We're very excited about this grant and so appreciative of all of the help that we've gotten in helping to spread the word about it. I do want to acknowledge that we have one of our board members on, Mr. Alex Loza, if you want to wave. We definitely appreciate our Artsfield board here. They're active and engaged and in many cases creating art for Chattanooga that makes this a great place to live, work, and play, as they say. So I do want to say thank you for participating and being part of our board and guiding what we do as an organization. And just to give you an idea about what Artsfield does, we are a local arts nonprofit and we're located right here in Chattanooga, serving all of Hamilton County. Our mission is to build a stronger community through the arts. And we do that through providing funding and support for arts programs and education initiatives in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. We work to support individual artists, organizations, and local community groups to develop arts programming and resources for our community. This graphic here is of our main programmatic areas that include grant making, arts education, advocacy work, shared services, and leadership development. And if you haven't yet, I encourage you to visit our website to find out more about what we do. Sign up for our e-newsletter. You can do that right on the first page of our website. And that way we can keep you informed of what's going on in the community. And we encourage you as well to follow us on social media. We've worked to have a fairly active Facebook and Instagram presence. And we post to LinkedIn sometimes. I mean, just probably not as much as we should, but we're on LinkedIn too and Twitter as well. So we encourage you to follow us and stay up to date on what we do. We also have lots of resources on our YouTube page. In fact, later we'll be posting this training to our YouTube page so that it's there for the public, and we'll continue to share it in that way. But we share all of our recordings of everything that we do with shared services, webinars, info sessions, such as this one, which we will again share afterwards. You want to go to the next one, Miriam? And I always like to share this slide, which really talks about the local impact of nonprofit arts and culture here in Hamilton County. And as you can see, the work that we do and the energy that we as an arts sector, not just Artsfield, but all of us together, helps to generate $172.5 million in economic activity just for Hamilton County. There are almost 6,400 people employed in arts-related jobs in our county, and 7 million plus in taxes and government revenue is generated just by the arts and nonprofit arts and culture sector here. And this information comes from the Americans for the Arts Economic Prosperity Study of 2017. And we're excited because in 2022, we're going to be doing that study again, surveying, collecting data, so that we can show the current impact of the arts sector. We had to skip a year because of COVID, like many of us had to skip different things because of COVID. But I appreciate everyone for showing up. I want to say thank you again. Thank you to Angela and community consultants for the work that you all have done with us. And I'm going to turn it back over to Miriam, who has all of the info about this grant. I guess I'm not. I had a third slide. Thank
Sorry.
you.
Did you want to
I only printed 2 of them. Of course, I do want to share too about our mission and action. Right now, we're funding 19 local arts organizations of various sizes. We fund community projects like in communities, and we really have prioritized communities that are underserved and also communities with low population density, so our more rural areas of the county. Last year, we funded 25 of those types of projects. Each year, we send 12 to 14,000 students in Hamilton County schools to have an arts field trip. They get to experience a different arts performance or play or museum experience each year, just like from kindergarten through 5th grade. We're very pleased because just last year, we were able to add 5th grade to the mix, and next year, with funding that we just received from the Colby Foundation, we'll be able to send 5th graders to a trip to sculpture fields or the Hunter Museum. So they're going to have a great visual arts experience. We've done emergency grants and emergency funds directly to artists. We do plan to open that back up in 2022. Whether there's COVID or not, people are always experiencing life-changing and life-altering situations. So we're happy that we're going to be able to keep our Artist Emergency Fund active and open into the future. And you can see here that in a typical year, I'm not speaking about last year, but in a typical year, Artsfield funding and supports, facilitates almost 1 million interactions just in Hamilton County. We're very, very proud of that, as well as the $1.4 million that we put back into the arts sector each year. So thank you all. I think this is my last slide, right, Miriam? Okay, perfect. But if you have any questions or want to reach out to me or want to connect to the work that we do in any way, you can always email me at james@artsfield.com. And I would love to sit and talk with you, go for coffee, have lunch or anything so that we can further our mission and continue building a stronger community through the arts.
Thank you, James. That was a great introduction to all of what Artsfield does. And yeah, I just want to give you an overview of the grant program itself. So the Racial Equity Grant for Individual Artists is an ongoing program that Artsfield has had. It's a grant program that we had started and then didn't have funding for, and so we just recently reactivated it. This is our second cycle of it. This year, and the grant is aimed at increasing arts and culture produced by diverse artists that are reflective of our community. These are just some key dates to keep in mind. So final applications need to be submitted online by 11:59 on Friday, the 26th of this month. Unless you're someone that is submitting a paper application, of course, with mail delays, just keep that in mind. We also offer draft reviews for applicants. So the draft review deadline is next Friday, the 12th. And so that's for anybody that has their application put together and wants us to take a look at it before you submit, to give you any feedback before you do your final submission. So, when you log into the application, you'll see that there's an option to either just straight submit it or to submit it as a draft application. So as far as the eligibility, this grant program overall is open to artists that identify in these various racial categories, but this funding cycle, we are focusing on Latino artists and artists that are either emerging or mid-career, and you need to be living and working in Hamilton County, Tennessee, as well as be 18 years or older. So the maximum award funding is up to $10,000, and the idea is that we'll grant up to 5 grants, and there's no matching funds that are required to apply for this. And I put that in there because sometimes some of our other applications do require you to have matching funds for your grant application, but this does not. And I also say that this application is also only open to individual artists. I just want to reemphasize that as well. Funding restrictions. So your grant proposal, whatever category you decide to apply in, your project needs to take place between the beginning of January 2022 and then December of 2022. So you'll have a total of 1 year to complete your application or to complete your project or whatever it is that you decide to apply for. And grant funds cannot be used for any capital improvements to buildings or construction, for any seed money for starting new organizations, or for any fundraising activities. This is just kind of some examples of the kinds of activities that you can apply for or projects that you can apply for the grant. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different categories that you can apply for. The first being the artist's work. And so that essentially kind of covers producing some kind of artistic work, whether that is a sculpture, whether that is a series of paintings, an album that you want to record. Those are kind of some of the ideas that you can fit within the artist's work. It also includes equipment purchase. Some examples can be purchasing sound equipment. One of our recent grantees who is a music recording artist, he purchased specifically sound equipment for himself and his production company, and then professional development. I don't know if you guys have been following us on social media, but we have been sharing the work that our last round of applicants who received funding. So Kofi, who is going with Jasmine, he applied under the professional development category. And so what he's using his funding for is to go, so he's Ghanaian and he's a drummer. He is going to Ghana to study under some storytellers in order to gain more skills around storytelling and incorporate that into the work that he does with the youth programs that he does in Hamilton County. And so he's using his funding specifically for that kind of professional development. But it can include anything from taking classes to doing an artist in residency, or like I said, taking classes. So those are the kinds of things that you can fit within these 3 categories. And then examples of appropriate funding use can be artist fees. So that's paying yourself for the work that you're doing. Supplies, of course, major equipment purchase, that would go specifically under the equipment, but it can also kind of cross if you're doing an artist's work and you need to purchase equipment for your work. Rental fees, marketing, if you're doing a work and you need, so for example, Charlie Newton is producing an art exhibit called The Black Bible. at Stoveworks. So he's going to need to market that exhibition. And so you can have line items that talk about marketing your artist's work, production related costs, documentation and assessment. That's really important because all of our grant programs do require you to document your work and then of course assess it. And I mentioned workshops, conferences, residency fees, course fees, transportation, and lodging, like if you're planning on doing a residency somewhere. All right, and feel free to ask me any questions as I'm going. Required support materials. So when you're getting going on your application, you are going to be asked to provide support materials or work samples is how the grant application calls it. It's a specific section that's pretty much the last section of your application. We highly encourage you to provide high quality work samples, to select samples that are most representative of your proposed grant project. So, you know, I think sometimes we want to put like everything, but just keep in mind that our grant panelists who are reviewing our applications are going to be reviewing a variety of applications, and they might not necessarily have time to look at everything. And, you know, you just want something, like I said, that is most representative of your work and who you are and kind of what you're wanting to do with the grant money itself and your proposed project. Also note that the grant portal can only store a maximum of 250 megabytes of work samples, which is not a lot of space. So a way to kind of get around that is either compressing files, which we have links in the application portal for you to compress any large files, or you can use any kind of cloud-based platform such as like a Google Doc where you can share your links or whatever, you know, your work samples are. We also encourage you to provide any letters of support as needed for your project. For example, you know, if you're deciding to paint a mural on a building, it would be great to provide a letter of support from the owner of that building or, you know, organization or whatever it is, saying that you have permission to actually, you know, engage in that project in their space. That just, you know, helps the panel know that, you know, you've taken the time to do your due diligence and actually plan for something that you can actually execute. Oops, sorry, that's a double slide. Additional grant information. So be sure in your grant narratives that you have your outcome stated. It's something that is accessible and documentable. And that's important for us in the sense that, like, you know, when we give out grants, we're also held accountable to our funders. So when you're able to provide documentation and assessment, we're able to actually show our funders this is the kind of work that we're funding in the community. And so it's important to have that aspect covered in your grant application. You also need to have either a federal tax ID or a social security number. And as I mentioned before, artists need to be based in Hamilton County with some kind of proof of residency, whether it's like a driver's license is, you know, the easiest thing. I did have someone who recently moved and they asked me if they could, you know, submit like something with mail that has your name and your address, and that's perfectly fine as well as proof of residency. Evaluation criteria. So of course, you know, this is a competitive grant. And so We do, as I mentioned, have a grant panel who is going to review your application, and they are scoring your application based on these 8 areas that are outlined here. So these are kind of the objectives that they're essentially grading your application on. So the strength and quality of your proposal, demonstrating the capacity to use the funds thoughtfully. And that kind of goes back to being able to show that you can actually execute the grant that you're proposing, like showing that you've done the research, you know how much the costs are, you've already, you know, if you're partnering with somebody on a project, that you've done the work to plan that out. A planning process that's in place and reasonable timetable to implement the project. As I mentioned, you know, you have 1 year to complete it. A budget that's reasonable. So, you know, once again, you know, if you're purchasing equipment, if you can list like exact prices, or you can link to, you know, where you're going to be buying those products or that equipment to show that is really helpful in making a strong application. Outcomes for the project. So like, you know, how is this helping you as an artist and your career, and as well as the community? Like, how is the work that you're doing connecting to our community? Because that's really an important thing that we encourage in our grants, and that community aspect needs to definitely be there. And then once again, your plans for documenting and assessing. So as I mentioned, there is a grant panel review. So our panels are essentially made up of members in the community who are representative of the demographic and geographic and artistic distribution that represents our community, and also as well as Artsfield board members. So during the panel meeting, we will invite our top scoring applicants to briefly talk about yourselves and your work and your grant application. And then a lot of the time they will ask you clarification questions, and also give you any feedback to actually help improve your proposed grant project as well. These are just some kind of general application tips, whether it's for this application or for other grant applications, or just applications in general. We encourage you to, of course, start by reading the guidelines thoroughly to check your eligibility. Be careful carefully complete your application. Explore the online application and portal ahead of time. In the application, under, like, I think it's the help section, there is a tutorial that can walk you through if, you know, kind of navigating the grant portal itself seems a little daunting. We're also just here. You can always give me a call if you're having trouble navigating it as well. One thing that I will also recommend is to do your application outside of the grant itself, because I know some people have worked in the application and it doesn't automatically save. So you have to, you know, either make sure you click save at the bottom after you've entered something in, or just have the application open, look at the questions, type it in a separate document, and then just copy and paste it over, just to be sure, because I've had people who have typed stuff in and then didn't click save and lost their information. So I don't want that to happen to anybody. So just be aware of that fact that it's not automatically saving your information. Communicate with Artsfield about any questions, or if you want to, you know, have a draft review as early as possible, of course, before the deadline. We're happy to help anybody in this process. But, you know, last minute help is limited. Of course, I know, you know, we get caught up in a lot of things, but we hope by you being here today, you're going to get started on your application as soon as possible. Be clear and concise in your application. It's always kind of just finding the right balance with just enough information and not too much information, or a lot of information, but not too much information, kind of just trying to be, find that middle ground. Because as I mentioned, our grant panelists are going to be reviewing a lot of applications. And also you just want to be sure that your the panelists are going to be able to understand what it is that you're proposing. I always tell applicants to have somebody that is outside of the work that you're doing review your application. So someone that like knows nothing about your work or isn't super familiar with whatever it is that you're proposing to read it. Because they're going to come from that kind of similar perspective of not knowing, and they can give you the best feedback and say like, hey, this part really doesn't make sense. Like, is this what you're trying to say? And they can help you kind of figure that out. And that's also what I can help you with as well. If you is giving you kind of that kind of direction and saying like, maybe this section isn't so clear, or maybe you need to add more information, or you have too much in there. As I mentioned, save your work. In the portal, you'll see that you can do a PDF preview. So I encourage you to preview your application in the PDF format, because that's actually the format that the panel is going to look at. They're, because when you're typing it into the portal, it looks different on the other side. So not completely different, but just so you see like sometimes like the spacing within the little blocks that you're typing in to see like, and it just gives you a different way of looking at it versus when you're actually in the box typing. And so you could see the whole application in one document. Scroll through it, make sure it's just how you want it to be before you hit submit. Double check your budget and make sure your expenses match up with your application narrative. So don't propose a project and then add in expenses that don't necessarily line up or make sense in that aspect. And of course, don't wait till the last minute. Yeah, just be, get ahead of the game. And yeah, we're here to help you to do that. Put calendar reminders if you need. That always helps me. Okay, I just want to talk about some of the benefits of applying. You get the experience of applying and going through a grant application process that you can actually use for other opportunities. You'll have an artist statement and portfolio that's ready to use. You get to become a part of our network and stay up to date on all of our ongoing programs, grants, and resources. And we'll also share your work and talents with the broader arts community. And as I said, we're always here to help. Please feel free to contact us, to contact me specifically. And then we also have Robin Howe, who is on our call right now. And she has also said that she is willing to volunteer and help anyone on their application, because she's helped other folks on applications. And of course, applying for grants is always a daunting task. So she said she is willing to help anyone. Robin, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself and say hi? And I'm going to plug your email into the chat.
Yeah, I guess probably for the last 15 or 20 years, I've helped people applying with their applications to graduate school, colleges, and I have worked on health grants and been on the other side of the table where I'm evaluating if the applicants are really answering the question. So I just thought that for people who were unfamiliar with the process, I'd be more than happy to help make sure that you answer the question. Don't get rambling, you're clear, you're concise. I'm also an English teacher, and it's just something I've done for a long time. So I would like to just be available as a sounding board pretty much throughout the process. I think I'm going out I've got a Thanksgiving break, but certainly, even before and after the draft process. And even if it's just cleaning up your language, if you struggle with, writing a good sentence, I've been teaching English for 20 years, so I'm just happy to be a volunteer worker.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I did plug Robin's email in there, so feel free to reach out to her. She's also a resource. I did have a couple questions that came in. So as far as, someone asked, are artists required to be experienced artists? No, as I said, you can be an emerging artist or you can be a established artist. The main thing is that art is a main source of your income and what you do as a practice and a career. And then another question, as far as our grant panel committee, that's open to anybody. Like, if any of you want to ever serve on any of our other grant committees, it's open to anybody. We have it up on our website, and I'll plug in the link to it. So we just, there's a simple Google form that we ask folks who are trying to serve on our grant panels to fill out. And we, as we have grant cycles coming up, we like I said, we invite anybody in the community, obviously, who has connections and relevant experience to serve on our grant panels. Okay, I'm looking at these questions in the chat box. Give me 1 second. Okay, great question. Is the grant application available in Spanish? Yes, it is. So this is the first time that we are offering our grant application that is not just in English, but also in another language. It's been translated into Spanish. As far as like our website itself is not translated, and that's something that we're working on, but the landing page for our grant portal is in Spanish, and then there's a translated version of the actual application as well. That's like, it's just like a PDF document that shows you step by step all of the questions in the actual application that helps you fill that out. What would be some examples of strong measurable outcomes for a writer publishing kids' books? Oh, that's a great question. Off the top of my head, I would say, well, one, like if you're thinking about publishing a book, I would assume that the book that you're publishing, you have some kind of aspect where you're going to be sharing it either with schools or some kind of youth groups. And when it comes to schools and age groups, there are curriculum content standards for each subject matter. And so I think I would start there. So those would be kind of measurable outcomes, like, connecting the book to content standards, and and those standards also talk about kind of what the learning outcomes are. So that's one way you could look at that. Cassie, does that help? Yes, okay, good. What was the other question? Do you know when grant decisions will be? Grant decisions, let me look at my timeline, will be announced around like the mid-December, I would say, is what we're aiming for. So mid-December, definitely before the end of the year. We're planning on having a celebratory event here at Artsfield in January, just as we kind of did with our last round. We kind of paired it with our Artsfield after work event and celebrated the artist that won the last round. Kate, I'm not sure about your question about defining the full timeline.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's new talent that has just gotten started, they may be working a full-time job, maybe two. So what are you defining like as a full-time and emerging artist? Like, do they not qualify if they're not spending 40 hours a week on their work? Or what is the definition for to assist our emerging artists? You know, that's where I'm confused.
Okay. No, that is a great question. And I would say that you know, obviously it's understandable that as an artist, you know, you can't, a lot of time, you know, you can't get all of your finances from doing your art. So it's understandable that, you know, if that's not your only avenue of gaining employment and revenue, that's fine. As far as like the emerging artists, like if you can demonstrate that you have been producing art for an extended period of time, and like, you know, this is not just like you're just getting into your art practice like with this grant, I would say that's kind of like the breaking point, if that makes sense. Like if you've already been doing art, maybe within, I don't know, let's say like the last year, you know, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to say, I think it's also going to be up to the panel to make that decision, because, you know, I may say one thing and someone else may say another thing. And I also think, you know, you can definitely make that argument for yourself as to what, you know, how long you've been practicing your art and what that has looked like for you. I hope that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think
okay.
so.
And we can talk about it more offline if you need to.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? No? How many of you guys on here have actually started your application? No one here has started? Okay. Well, hopefully, are you going to start after today? Fingers crossed. Yes, I hope. Okay, I have another question. Concern about the social. Yeah, well, we said social security number or tax ID.
A lot of undocumented people have neither. So how are we going to reach people who have been working in the arts but don't have that type of document? I'm just trying to figure out how that's really working with the Latinx community, because there's a lot of us that aren't necessarily there yet in their paperwork.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I do not know the specifics on if there's any like wiggle room in that sense. The only thing I can think of is if you are able to find some like an organization or potentially somebody else who can accept it on your behalf, and we would just not put the contract in your name as the applicant. It would be a contract in somebody else's name or another organization who can function as a fiduciary. Yeah, that was a really great question. And that's something that we were thinking of, and that's why we added, of course, you don't need a social security number, but a tax ID, but you're right, some people don't have that as well. But a lot of folks do go through that process. Like if you're not a nonprofit, they'll partner with nonprofit organization that has that nonprofit status. So I'm sure we could find a way to essentially, you know, find someone to accept it on your behalf.
Hey, I just want to say something. I think there's someone else on there that has my name. That's not me, so I don't know who that is.
Okay.
So that's kind of concerning.
Yeah, I don't know who that is either. Does the other Jocelyn want to say something? No, okay. Maybe I'll take a look back at the registration list and hopefully we can figure it out. Monica asked, how broad in scope can the application be? Should you list as many activities as possible or only focus on a few categories? Can you elaborate on that question? Like as far as categories, and what specific categories are you referring to? And when you say scope, can you just give a little bit more about that? Like the artist fees, production costs. I'm still not really quite understanding. Oh, should you like? Oh, okay. So I guess is your question asking? You just need to list like what is relevant to your grant. Like if you're, like I said, you know, I described those different projects that folks applied to, and whatever is relevant to either your equipment grant that you're writing for, your professional development, your artist work. So if you're, like I said, for example, applying for professional development, if you have travel fees, if you have supplies that you need, that's what you essentially need to include. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, great. Any other questions? Okay.
I actually have one more question, Mary.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I will be filing under, or excuse me, applying under equipment category
Mm-hmm.
and having photography as my medium.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to do a gallery exhibit
Mm-hmm.
as kind of my final work. So is it okay if we add prints to that? If I'm still falling under equipment, that'd be for more hardware, but would it be okay to include prints in that?
When you say include prints, you mean like actually getting your work printed?
Correct.
Yeah, of course. That would be essentially, you mean like actually making the prints to hang your show?
Correct. I think there's a whole other category for that, right? As far as putting a show together, and I wasn't sure if that would be too much of a crossover or if it wouldn't be specific enough.
Yeah, so what I would say for you, since your end goal really is to do an exhibit, like an artist's work essentially, because you're trying to do an exhibition, you might want to think about applying under the artist's work, and then just putting in under like what your budget line items are, you know, whatever equipment you need to purchase to produce the show, and then your supplies and any production costs. So that would, something like that would go under production costs. So printing the actual images that you need to do to hang up your show.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I think I was going to do equipment, but that sounds like a better approach. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Someone also asked, or Cassie asked, when will there be another grant cycle? So I think one of the slides that I showed you were essentially going through with the funding we have currently anyways, it's something that we need to keep fundraising for, but this is the second of 3. So the third round that we're going to do next year will encompass Asian artists and Indigenous, which includes like Native and Pacific Islander artists. And we chose to specifically to do that just because, you know, based on like if you look at the census data, like as far as like the representation in our community, that it would be best to, you know, group those 2 groups into one cycle of granting. And so it will essentially cycle back through and start with Black artists, Latino artists, and then cycle back through to the third category of Asian and Indigenous and Pacific Islanders. So that would be, I guess if we had to like actually time it out, it would be 2024 is when this would come back around for Latino artists. Can the grant be used to buy equipment as well? Yeah, so that is one of the funding categories is equipment purchase. And that's also kind of one of the items that you can add as a budget line item. Did I answer all the questions in the chat? I hope. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'll just reiterate that, you know, I'm here as a resource, and Robin is here as a resource. I did want to quickly just take a quick poll and see and get your feedback if you all think that we should host another one of these only in Spanish, because we want to, but we don't know if that's a need, because we haven't had so far. No one has requested that, and no one has started an application that is in Spanish right now. So just kind of wanted to gauge the room on that. If you know any artists that are only Spanish speaking and you guys have heard that need, we just wanted to throw that out there. Any feedback?
Hey, no, I think that sounds great. I mean, I personally haven't heard of anybody specifically requesting, and I figured, like you said, you would find out about it. So I'm just gonna, I guess I'm available if you guys need any support for when you do have that session.
Okay.
I'm sure some of the other folks on the call might offer up as well. But yeah, so I haven't heard of any specific people that only, you know, need it specifically in Spanish, but I'm available if you do need some support.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Xavier. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I was guessing that if we do a Spanish, should we push back another week for submission? Because that will be cutting them short. You know, like us will have 3 weeks. Those people are here today will have 3 weeks to apply. And if let's say the Spanish one is on next week, then they have only 2 weeks to create their application. So how would that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we can definitely consider pushing back the deadline. We would have to change like all of our marketing content that we've already put out there. And we actually just filmed the commercial too. That's supposed to go out this week as well. So
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to change. I guess, Alex, are you saying, you know, have you heard, is there already people that
No,
are?
I haven't either.
Yeah, we haven't. No one has approached us. So that's why I'm just trying to gauge and see if it's a need. And, you know, when we were working with community consultants on figuring this out, they had just recommended like to just see if it's a need, and if it is, to have one, and if it's not, then
Mhm.
leave it as is.
Yeah, my only
Yeah.
question was
Yeah, I
because,
wonder.
oh, go ahead, Xavier.
No, no, I was gonna say that I guess you filmed the commercial, and did you do that in Spanish? I believe, right?
We did.
So right, so maybe that'll kind of put people, bring people out that might be interested in more information. But yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, that if the Spanish commercial goes out, then there's going to be interest probably sometime this week, next week.
That is our hope, hopefully. I'm gonna throw my email in there for anyone that needs to be in contact with me. If you need me to walk you through the application, I'm happy to do that. And then also throw my phone number in there. Feel free to give me a call. Preferably between like 9 and 5, let's say 9 and 6 o'clock. But I understand, like, if you need to call me after work, just send me a text and we can arrange that as well, or just email me. And yeah, and Robin as well, I threw your email in there, but I can throw it back in the chat as well. I hope you all get a chance to get started on your applications. And like I said, if you want to submit a draft, please do so by before next Friday. And then once again, the application is due November 26th. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.